bit more time. Okay, but we're going to start. So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Claire Ebury, and I'm an associate at the Good Board, which is an exec search and leadership advisory company. You might have gathered from the name, it's a good company. It's going for B Corp status at the moment, and this is hopefully first of many online events for the Good Board on the big topics. We wanted to do it now and on this topic to support Black History Month. So a couple of bits of housekeeping to kick us off. Nobody's told us that they've got accessibility requirements, but we've enabled the subtitles anyway. If you don't want them and they're appearing on your screen, they can be a bit distracting. So there's a button that says live transcript at the bottom, and you can turn them off there. The session's being recorded. It's going to be on the Good Board's YouTube afterwards. So if you don't want to be on film, then please turn your cameras off. And then in terms of how the event will run, we're going to have an hour of discussion and then half an hour of questions from the audience. So please put your questions into the chat over the course of the conversation, and then I'll come to you. If you'd rather I read the question out for you than come to you, then spell that out as well. And I'm happy to do that. So let's begin. Why is it important that we have things like Black History Month, or more broadly, I suppose, why we can't take our eye off this issue of equality for Black people? So I've got a few stats here to kick us off. The McGregor-Smith review, which looked at race in the workplace, said that the potential benefit of diversity to the UK economy is £24 billion. And yet at the same time, we know that 45% of Black people have experienced racism at work in the UK. The ITC's Race at the Top report said that only 1.5% of senior roles are held by Black people. And in February this year, the number of Black leaders in the FTSE 100 companies was zero, big fat zero. So we've had the COVID pandemic, we've got the Black Lives Matters movement, and we've had the murder of George Floyd in America last year. And all of those things have shone a light on deep-seated inequalities across our society. We're coming back together after the last 18 months or so in relative hibernation. We're hearing a lot about building back better, about levelling up. We've even got business leaders saying that they want to see some change, they want to be part of some change. But as we start to drive this change, we're going to see some people being the only or even still the very first Black person to do X, Y, or Z. So today we're going to talk about what it means to be that person, the one Black person around the board table or on the corporate stage or in the newspapers or in these leadership roles. So I'm going to introduce you to our speakers. I'm going to have to read this. I'll introduce you to Lexi, even though we're not sure if we're going to get sound from Lexi. She's a global HR director, a seasoned NED, and a certified coach. She's worked with organisations of all shapes and sizes, big names like AT&T, Jack Wills, Sainsbury's, Anacado, and across the third sectors. We've got Sharon Amesu. Sharon's a professional speaker. She's a former barrister. She now runs her own consultancy, supporting organisations with leadership development, diversity and inclusion. And she also runs the awesome She Leads for Legacy, which aims to support Black women to get into leadership positions. She's on the Northwest Business Leadership Team. She's a board member of the Halle, and she's being featured right now as one of the Black pioneers of Greater Manchester as part of a campaign by Google Arts. How cool is that? And then Clive Memmott is Chief Executive of Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. He's a director of the British Chambers of Commerce, of Brockholes, of Business Finance Solutions. He's a trustee of the National Football Museum, and he's written a book on employee engagement. It's called Growing Your Own Heroes. And I feel like after those stats, we could do with a few heroes around here. So Lexi, are you able to kick us off? This was your idea, the one. Can we hear you? No, we've got no sound from you, Lexi. I'm sorry. Right. Okay, Sharon, we're going to come to you first then. So this wasn't your idea, this idea of the one, but She Leads for Legacy talks about this kind of thing quite a lot as well. This idea of being the one, the first. Why do you think it's important?
Thanks very much, Claire. It's great to be here, and it's great to see so many people around the room and interested in this topic. So She Leads for Legacy, as you say, was established to support the progression of Black women into senior leadership and board level positions. And this conversation around the one sits very much at the heart of the issues that we explore within our community. Because no doubt, as you say, as we hope to see this acceleration, there will be many Black women, and in particular, my focus is intersectionality, being a Black woman, and the unique challenges that we face of being the only person in the room. And it's so important that there's two areas of focus with this which are really important. One is the realization of what it means to be the only Black woman in the room for the Black woman herself. And we have to deal with stuff like internalized racism, stereotype threat, where we have a perception of ourselves in that space and how we occupy that space. But also it's an important conversation, secondly, because what we want to do is raise awareness and encourage those who are already in that space to be mindful about the experiences of those who are going to be the first. And how do you create a space where those people feel as though they belong, as though they have voice, and you conscientize yourself around some of the unique challenges that they may face. So having this conversation, being aware of the challenges is so appropriate right now, Claire.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm trying to get Lexi to dial in on her phone, so I think that's why she's just disappeared. We will come back to Lexi. Clive, you're sitting on a lot of boards, and you've seen a lot of boards, and you've seen how companies operate. Have you noticed this idea of there being one Black person every now and again on these boards? And what's
God, absolutely, or more to the point, no Black people on those boards whatsoever, which of course makes it even worse. I mean, I know, are Black leaders still in the minority? Well, of course they are. Are leaders of colour still in the minority? Of course they are. Are women in the minority on a lot of boards and senior boards? And the answer is, of course they are. And there are some outstanding and stunning exceptions to that, some incredibly talented individuals, that have bridged that gap. But the numbers remain unacceptable and alarming. It's as simple as that, Claire. And we don't talk, directly enough about that.
So have you noticed the thing that Sharon discussed there about there being additional pressure on the people who are the one? Have you noticed that yourself?
I think that's absolutely right, because you get into a kind of false narrative about it takes absolutely exceptional pressure to break that barrier. And of course, that puts more pressure. It sets higher expectations. And even the most talented, experienced people that are very comfortable in those senior positions, can feel very, very different. You've heard, Sharon and I have done quite a lot of stuff together recently, and no matter how much you've done, but even I, with my experience, if there'll be regular occasions when in me, as the typically, the old white bloke, who certainly, the world is certainly more set up for people like me. But if you're expressing absolutely minority opinions in those rooms, I can still feel uncomfortable. Well, imagine how other people feel. And we've got to get people thinking, from the perspective of other people about how that feels. I've talked to some of the most, and worked with some of the most experienced people who will publicly, and the difficulty is, I'll be interested in Sharon's view on this, and Lexi's, but unfortunately we've silenced her, is that, publicly they feel the need to say, no, I've not seen those barriers, I don't feel those barriers. And then privately they'll say, there are huge barriers. And I'm still struggling with it, but I don't feel I can show vulnerability by admitting that they're still there, and that's how I feel. And I think these are very difficult things, and we've got to let people talk freely and openly about this, not feel that somehow they're they're emasculating their career if they actually say that.
Sharon, the first time I heard of this idea really of the one was from you, I would say. You were the one Black person on the board of the Institute of Directors in the Northwest at the time. Well, can you just explain to us what it was like? Because obviously it's a great position to get into. It, you know, you were a leading light, but what does it feel like to be that person?
I think a really interesting point has been just raised by Clive. And I can talk about my experience, but I can also speak to anecdotally as well, the experiences of many of the women who I work with, or we recently were involved in collaboration with the University of Manchester, where we did some research exploring the experiences of Black female career professionals. And I can speak first of all from my own personal experience, and that is that throughout my career, I have been the one in so many spaces. And so I started out my professional career as a barrister. And I remember starting out at the bar. I was the first person in my family to go to university. And so that was the one in that sense, sort of emerging from my community in that way. I remember when you're being called to the bar, then you join one of the four what's called Inns of Court to socialize you into practice at the bar. And I joined an inn called Middle Temple. And in that process, you have to attend a certain number of what they call dinings, which is dinners. And I remember being one of the only few Black people in that room and feeling that the environment was very alien to me, because lots of people were drinking port wine. They had 6 or 7 knives and forks. I had no clue because I'd always just used a pair. And so there is that sense of, you know, I remember people talking about riding horses, and I was thinking the nearest I've got to a horse is riding a donkey at Blackpool, and just being alien. The worlds were completely alien to my own. And so there are so many situations that I've faced where I've been the only one in the room. And it was why I, with my daughter, who herself is making her way into the legal profession, Claire, we were having conversations 20 years apart in our journeys, and looking at the challenges that we face of being the one and what that means, and the implications and the import of that. And there really takes, to Clive's point, there's a real vulnerability, because you already feel a sense of imposter syndrome. Am I supposed to be here? Am I a token appointment? Am I simply ticking a box here for somebody? And if that's the perception that you hold about yourself, then that will be sort of internally diminishing of your voice and sense of self. And that's what I've had. And what I found, you'll recall, Claire, when I first started as the branch chair of the Institute of Directors, and our initial conversation as you as regional director was, oh my God, what am I doing here? But actually, what is significant here was the way in which you engaged with me. And it's to my point about the importance of those who are already in the room, providing support and enabling the vulnerability and the questions. And as Clive was saying, the experience is, on the one hand, you don't want to say anything because you already don't feel as though you're supposed to be there. And then if you tell someone that you don't, then it's going to reinforce the belief that you're not supposed to be there. And so it really requires strong, solid relationships with trusted people to allow you to open up and build that confidence.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Lexi. Hallelujah.
Yes.
Great. I'll be the one who can't work technology. I do certainly apologize. As Claire said, this was my idea, so I want to get on, and I thank Sharon so much, because I'm going to echo so many things that she said. So Claire, are you okay for me to go forward now?
Yeah, that's great. If you can hold the phone a bit nearer to your mouth, Lexi, I think that might help us to hear you a bit better.
Okay, is that better?
That's much better, thank you.
Great, thank you. So we talked about the one, and I just want to thank Claire, because she has been so instrumental in helping me and supporting me to take my many thoughts about this subject and be quite succinct. She told me 10 minutes, and so I've been working really hard to stick to it. So I would also like to say how privileged I am to be with this panel. I mean, Sharon stepped in, and that's fantastic that she's been able to do that. And then third, it is not my wish to upset or offend anyone with this conversation, but that's what I want to do. I want to start the conversation. And one of the things that Claire told me about being succinct was to do themes of three. So I said that my themes of three were to be, to actually start the conversation, help to provide solutions, and be solutions focused in this. We want to change the experiences of the one, but we also want to broaden access so that there are more than one. So I'll speak from my own lived experiences using examples, and I won't go into names or of the organizations to protect the innocent. I say that jokingly, but what I mean is that when these things happened and when I was at these events, the individuals did not know or organizations didn't know what they were doing, but I have spoken to all of them after the occurrence. So again, my theme of three is that I'm going to put it into context of being the one, raise awareness, and be solutions oriented. As this is Black History Month, I will start with history. As you will tell from my voice, I am not from the UK. I've lived here for 21 years, but I was born in a small East Texas town of 462 people in a rural farming community and environment. So some of my references will be US based. Also, my experiences of the one, not going to be everyone's experience. And so what I always ask when people say, what should we call you? And I say Lexi, but if you ask how you should describe me, I'm okay with color person, woman of color, Black. I know not everyone is. So I say, when you don't know or unsure, ask. So this is about Black history. So I'll bring in the history first. There was a concept called the talented 10. And in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois, he was a Black activist, author, civil rights champion. He emphasized the need for higher education to develop the leadership, the capacity for leadership amongst the most talented 10% of Black Americans. So this would be teachers, professors, professionals, and professionals, ministers, and spokesmen and women who could earn access and privilege to inspire the masses. Before that time, it was said that Black people should go to technical schools to learn how to do kind of a day laborer's role. So I believe in many ways that the talented 10 has informed the one. So last night I attended an event of women of color who have been identified and strive to be senior civil servants, so DG level. And the first speaker said she was so excited to look around the room and not be the one. I looked around the room as well, and I was happy. But I realized that I have been so programmed to be the one that and so I could show my authentic self, that I had not noticed. I had not noticed that I was in a room full of wonderful, beautiful women of color. So what is the one? The only one on the senior management team, the only trustee, the only NED, the only one who is on a prestigious graduate program for FTSE 100 companies, the only one in the room when your FTSE 100 company has a conference of directors and above, so more than 600 people, and you're the only one at the conference. So when you are the only one, there are many things that you have to normalize, being the one. So, but most of us can do that because we have been the one early on. You're noticed early on by teacher, by maybe someone, a sister in the church, or if you're lucky, another family member who has been the one, or another one. Most of us are not so lucky. So therefore, you have to learn what we say in the Black community is you have to learn how to hold yourself. You have to learn how to carry yourself, which means you have to learn how to adopt and be adept at understanding the room, understanding the situation, and if needed, you need to level up your behavior or level down your behavior. But you will be suspect to both sides. Why you? Some people will ask. They will wonder, even though you have a place at the table, are you just going to be the same? Were you chosen because you are palatable? So in America, we say you would be an Oreo, black on the outside, white on the inside. In the UK, you're called a coconut. And then whites will say, well, why is she here? Is she a token? Will she bring nothing to the conversation? We just needed a black face or a brown face on the website so we can say we're diverse. So they will say, was the access criteria lowered so she could be part of us in the interview process and in the assessments? So I use an example from my family. My niece scored in the 95 percentile on the US's college entrance exam. So she went to a very prestigious school in the US, and she was asked by one of her fellow students early on, a white student, are you here on an athletic scholarship? So my niece jokingly said, and I use humor as well, when I'm in trying to make a point or when I'm kind of uncomfortable with the situation. So my niece said, look at me. What sport do you think I excel at? I'm overweight and I know I need to lose a few pounds. So then the person said, oh, I didn't mean that. So again, you're always questioned, do you belong? And you put extra pressure on yourself. You've been told by your family, you have to be twice as good to get half as far. You don't want to let the side down. You're the only one at the table. You strive to be perfect and no one is. You may be a second generation immigrant and your family has invested a lot in you for you to go to university, for you to get a senior position. They're supporting you, but they don't understand what you're going through. My mother used to say if I was having problems at work, I would call her and she would say, well, baby, if they don't understand what you bring to the table and they don't like what you're doing, they don't deserve you, which was great for me to hear, but it did nothing for me to go in the next morning and work with my concerns and problems. So from my experience as a young woman for a FTSE 100 company I was working with, the company decided to look at what it was like to be a person of color working in this organization. There was a focus group had. First focus group, it was the first time at head office. It was a glass room that so many people had seen so many Black people in a room. So we just had people walking by kind of going, what are they doing in there? What's happening? One young woman spoke up. She's 23. She said, I don't want to be the one. I'm the only one in my university program. I'm the only one on the graduate program in this FTSE 500 company. And she said with tears in her eyes, I don't want to be that. At the end of the session, I walked up to her and I kind of used the slang. I said, baby girl, if you're all that you say you are, get used to being the one. And I said this with tears in my eyes because I said the same things when I was 23 and not much had changed. I said to her, you embrace it. Do not feel any guilt. Do not let anyone tell you that your feet do not belong under this table. The only thing I ask of you is that you send the lift back down for others so you are not the only one. So in 5 years from now, you and I are not having this same conversation. So solutions, I say it's three. I'm going back to my theme of three. It takes all. It takes all in the recruiting and appointment process. It takes the candidates to be prepared for their next opportunity. It takes organizations to ready the environment to ensure that when they do hire the one, that the environment is ready to hear different voices. And it takes recruiters and executive search firms to work with both the candidates and the organizations for change.
Lexi,
and what I will say.
Can I interrupt you at this point? Because I think that you've got more things that we can come back to as well. But I just want to you've raised so many themes already that I want to bring Sharon and Clive back in just to talk about some of those themes before we move on to some of the others, if that's okay. So
yes, I just have one last sentence, so I'll do that. We can all be sponsors and allies. So thank you.
Sorry, Lexi. Right. So, Clive, I'm going to come to you first and then you, Sharon, because one of the things that Lexi said there is something that I've observed a lot, and that is we, white people, speaking for my people, we do seem to have set some kind of standard of, let's look at the 10%, the top 10%, the 10% best Black people. Why can't we have average Black people? We've got plenty of average white people right at the very top of this country. What is this that we're doing, and how do we fix it? You're on mute, Clive.
Sorry, everybody. In a way, I think Lexi's kind of answered that question already. You know, that is, I mean, it's a nature of how this country is organised, how it's structured. We're incredibly centralised politically, economically, socially, and therefore, you know, so that whole decision-making process emanates from a very narrow base. You know, this is still very much a class-based country and a hierarchical country in many of its approaches like that. So that whole nature of how you bring diversity into the act of, say, decision making. You know, this isn't just about saying why aren't more people of colour making important decisions. And actually, well, one of the more invidious things is that it's often the case that, but how is the decision made and who's involved in that? Well, you may well have people sitting around the table, but they're not actually involved in making the decision. Because, you know, again, I think Lexi referred to that, it's that perception, isn't it? You know, this is one of the problems, the unintended consequences of quota mentality. If you've got some round on the toe, we've done that bit, but how do you feel in those circumstances? I mean, look, this is really, really difficult. I mean, I'll give you 3 quick examples. There was quite a theme of getting young people onto boards, particularly a few years ago. And I mean, it was absolute nonsense. So you take a young people, which is good, and we want them involved in the narrative of an organisation, equally good. Well, we'll just stick them with the board. Well, interesting. And then the board doesn't change its behaviour. The board transacts exactly the same business in exactly the same way, in exactly the same opaque language. And how do you think those people feel? So it is absolute overt tokenism. Now, I personally favour parallel boards of young people, you know, operating to a different dialogue, because I think a lot of the organisational structures just can't take it. I've seen women in top teams over, you know, I've been doing pretty decent jobs for a long time now, treated appallingly over the years and marginalised by that, you know, that the basically the culture within the organisation. And it's a one-eyed approach. You have to adapt with my organisation, not the company. The organisation should adapt its culture to recognise the individual. A very, very good friend of mine was a very senior Black leader who did some incredibly difficult work globally. I mean, he was systematically branded as aggressive and difficult for the stridency and the passion and the challenging nature of his views. And this was an incredibly strong person who you would see incredibly vulnerable, because the sheer, you know, it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And again, I mean, the last thing, I mean, let's look at people that we might not like. I mean, I'm not a great fan of Hillary Clinton. I'm certainly not a great fan of Priti Patel. But I tell you what, they are treated fundamentally differently, because they're people in positions of power that don't fit it with the norms, the question you pose asked, Claire.
Sharon, what do you think?
I completely concur with Clive's comments. And can I just say in parentheses just how refreshing this conversation is, to be in a space which is broad and has representation across the piece on this topic. I just think it's incredibly refreshing. It's incredibly refreshing to have Clive's perspective on this. I think it's really empowering, and hear Lex's experience. I just think it's just remarkable. So I just wanted to say that in parentheses. So if we look at, can I just also say that it's not about aspiring for average being okay. So we're not saying what we want to do is just lower the bar and let everyone in and that's okay. Not at all. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're thinking about is, how do people tend to get to senior leadership and board level positions? Most jobs that are occupied are not the ones that are advertised in the official channels. Actually, it's through relationships. And so it's because of those unofficial links that take place. I know this person, this person knows that person, this person is in my network, and that's how appointments take place. It's through those connections. And so the reason why we don't see the increase in diversity is because of the poor levels of social and political capital that people from racially minoritized communities have. They don't have the same level of links and connections and insider knowledge that their white counterparts have. And if you don't have that, and if there isn't someone who is in the inside circle actively broadening their horizons and their perspective and widening their aperture as to who they engage with, as you did, Claire, I keep coming back to you, Claire, because I genuinely mean this. What you were intentional about with the IOD and all of the events that we did was widening the aperture and taking risks with people who have not fitted the traditional mold, who may not necessarily have the formalized experience, but you see are the qualities that can add value. And it's that will enable the shift forward. And also there is it's the active seeking out. I think that's really important here, because so often what we hear is, well, you know, we've advertised, they're not coming forward. They're not, what else can we do? If we've created the opportunity, it behoves them to step in. Well, one of the things is awareness. Where are you making known these opportunities? And if I don't feel as though I'm going to belong in the space, to what extent am I going to step up into that space where I feel as though I'm not going to belong? So it really is that intentionality that is required. It's also about thinking outside of the box and beyond the usual expectations as to who is eligible and who isn't, and broadening those networks so that you can reach into communities that you might not otherwise have been connected with.
Brilliant.
Yes, and I would just like to quickly add that it has been found that people of color are put into positions based on attainment and not potential. So you have to have shown that you can do everything and more. And as an example, a FTSE 100 company I worked for, we put people into the program where we felt like they could go further, talent program. For white individuals, if they were interviewed for a role and they didn't quite meet all the requirements, it was he or she can grow into the role. If a Black person did that, it was he or she, we are taking a risk. So the language changes.
That's incredible. Lexi, I'm going to stay with you if that's okay, because you told me a story about when you went for a job, you were in a particular job interview and you had a very particular experience. Can you just describe that to everybody, please?
So I hope this is the right one, because Claire and I had a fantastic conversation. So I was headhunted by an organization to be an executive. I was headhunted by an executive search firm to work for an executive search firm. Is that the one, Claire?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I went through the interview. I was told that the co-founders, this company was 20 years old, they weren't sure why they were having to do this, but their venture capitalist investors that says, you have no diversity in your firm. You need diversity. You can only interview people of color. The venture capitalist said this. So I interviewed. The feedback came to me, and I was told I was not successful in the role. I've been on boards, FTSE 500, FTSE 100, Fortune 500, and FTSE 100 companies. I had been an executive search consultant for over 10 years, and I was told, you're not qualified for this role. So I said, well, I need some feedback. And I was told, well, you don't want me to hire you as a token, do you? Now that was based on my experience. So I simply said, I'm no one's token. You put my feet under your board table, you will soon figure that out. I'm also going to bring like-minded people with me so that we can be more diverse. We have this conversation again with someone like me, I will come to your organization pro bono and do a half-day workshop. And when he asked me, you don't want me to hire you as a token, do you? I said, why not, jokingly. It's a good job. The salary's good. I think I can make an impact. Why don't you let me make that decision?
I find that shocking. Sharon.
It's appalling. It's absolutely appalling. But do you know what? It's much more commonplace than we'd like to admit. That's the sadness of this. And we see so many stereotypes. We see such diminishing of value of Black people in the workplace. We're obviously focusing on Black people because this is the conversation. And it has a huge impact if you allow it to, but we have to be aware of this. If you allow it to, it can have such a huge impact on your sense of self and what you're eligible for and what you're capable of. And you really have to, for me, have to really remind myself and surround myself with key cheerleaders who are affirming in order to keep pressing forward. Because if you don't and you allow those situations to really deepen into your psyche, it can be incredibly impairing. And I relayed recently a situation that I faced. It wasn't going for a job application, but it's more so around the impact of people's perceptions of you and what behaviors that can drive. So I recently, just a week or so ago, was invited to be a part of a panel in central Manchester. And when I arrived at the building for this event, there was a reception area, and sat behind the desk at reception was a security guard. So I went into the building and I said, is this the location for this organization? The security guard said, yes, but this isn't the entrance for you to use. What you need to do is go back out of the building, turn left, left again, go up some stairs, knock on the door, and they'll let you in. So I'm in a hurry to get to this place. I follow the instructions and realized that it's the back of the building. I thought, this is strange. I'm not going to a secret bingo hall. So I knock on, no one's answering. It's a concrete door. And as I am waiting for someone to answer, I see some people with hairnets at the back of the building. They're clearly working at a front level position. And I thought, this is odd. So I go back to the security guard, say, I really don't understand, because this is the building I'm going to. It's a significant event. Can you direct me? Directs me right back. And I thought, this doesn't make sense. I make my way around in the opposite direction and see front and center on the front of the building, this sign for this building. So he would have known, because he's very familiar with the area, given the contact that he'd had with other people entering the premises. And it dawned on me in that moment that he'd sent me to the back of the building because he regarded me as the cleaner. And I was dressed like this. So everyone else had arrived and they were sat down. Now I had to deal with, in that moment, the issue of being diminished in this way. Now, I have nothing at all against, I was a cleaner. I've been a cleaner when I was studying in order to make my way through university. I've done that. So it's not diminishing or devaluing of that role. It's that in his head, that's all I could have been doing in that building. And that has an impact on us and our psyche, and that happens at varying levels. So it's so much to Lexi's point, how do we conscientize people's awareness around the impact that their biases, that their internalized racism, that their overt or covert behaviors can have on other people who are the one in the room.
Clive, I've never had that experience that Sharon's had, and I certainly don't dress as beautifully as she does going to an event. Nor have I had an experience anything like Lexi's in that interview. How about you?
I can't agree more. I think Lexi's incredibly powerful point, beautifully articulated as well, on this notion of you've got to absolutely hit the highest level of attained proof that you've a right to do that job. When it's interesting, the sort of people that will be recruited on the basis of potential. And they are very different things. Now, I tend to recruit on potential. I always have done, because you always recruit looking to the future whenever you can. And I think one thing that's probably not raised, and I will come back to this again and again, probably in this discussion. This is people then try to make this up as, oh, this is all about unconscious bias. I have a real problem with this, because generally it's very conscious bias. And until we call it out for what it is, you will not solve this problem. And if I use an analogy, you refer to it, Sharon. This conversation is around people of colour, black people, black leaders. But let me use a bad analogy here. But if you've got two 25-year-olds, one male, one female, equally skilled, equally motivated, equally experienced, applying for a job, often in a smaller organisation, and the male gets the job. Why do we think that is? Well, mainly it's because there's a real risk in the employer's mind that that female will go and have children. And I tell you what, no one wants to talk about those things. And we've got to get over this. This happens. You can't prove it. I can't prove it. Like you, Lexi, I spent a few years doing executive recruitment and understand how that works. You cannot prove these things, but we have to say that this is how decisions are made. They are fundamentally unfair. You can, well, that small organisation's got to think of its future. It's got, yeah, fine, it has, but that's not an excuse for the way those decisions are being made. And we don't. If you use opaque language, Claire, you won't solve the problem.
And you have to use logic, because a woman may go off and have a baby. She can certainly return and go to a more senior role, but you don't know that a man is going to stay either. He may go for another job.
Absolutely.
That's right. Lexi, we'll stay with you for a second, because you talked about this idea of being the token person. When we spoke on the phone the other day, you had a strong point to make about there's a bit of a swing in the way that we're talking about this, or a perceived swing, I should say, that it's swung too far in the favour of black people. Well, tell us about that.
And anytime, if you think that the last 2 years has been a revolution with Black Lives Matter and what happened to George Floyd, anytime there's a spotlight, whether you think it's a revolution, evolution, anytime there's a spotlight placed on something, then people feel like things will swing too far, and then it will come back, it will auto-correct. But I've spoken to a lot of senior women in my network, one who was specifically told that she was restructured, etc. She was specifically told by her line manager, she was a VP, this person is the SVP, if I had been treated as badly as you say you have been in this organization, if I were you, I would just leave, because you are a black female. And in this environment, you can just write your ticket. So there's a thought out there that a lot of people are getting, a lot of black people are getting these senior roles that they're not qualified to do. And I always challenge individuals, show me in the announcements, show me announcements of companies where this has happened, first of all, and they can't point to anyone. And then I say the word token. I want to change the definition of that word. Token, one of the definitions is a small gift of appreciation, but I want to change that to say pioneer, because a token is, what, as is used, you have hired someone just for their color or their gender or their disability who can do nothing for you. You have hired an individual that you're going to pay 6 figures to sit in your office, to be on your website. I don't know a company in the world who would use that in a business plan. So I want to change the word token to pioneer. You are the first, but you shouldn't be the only.
Sharon?
I think it's remarkable how misperception really drives behavior. And we saw that, didn't we? We saw that in the wake of the George Floyd murder and the subsequent resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, as in bringing awareness and focus to the issues that were being faced, that continue to be faced by the Black community. And then as a result, the counter narrative that emerged that actually, you know, we've done it now, we've solved it. The government have published a report and therefore problem solved, box ticked, move on. And it's to Lexi's point that there is this misperception, and I think sometimes there's an agenda behind it, actually, Claire. There's an agenda behind it, because if you create the perception that we'll go too far, then that will stunt people's aspirations and growth and ambition within their organizations to change the agenda. For those who are being appointed, they'll ever be seen as the person who's just the organizational response to an issue, and the approach toward movement will never be legitimized and recognized and validated as continuing to be necessary. And if we look at the state of the condition, you set out the current state of play, Claire, when we opened up. How far are we from equity? How far are we from seeing what we want to see by way of representation in our organizations at middle management, senior management, board level? You see, we see lots of representation at the front line, and sometimes what you can have is a distortion, can't you? As far as organizations saying, well, we are diverse, you know, but when you actually look and you interrogate the data, you realize that it's at entry level, and they're not progressing much beyond that. So let's also look at how there's a distortion of the reality. And so I say to that, I say this, all right, for those organizations who may be in fear of being seen to be too proactive on this issue because they're concerned about how the pendulum might swing against them, keep doing what needs to be done. Your data is clear. You know the truth. You see where the representation is. Look at the career progression in your organizations, and that will tell you that actually what you might be concerned about, there's a greater concern to be aware of, and that is your key stakeholders are requiring of you to increase representation so that you're doing good for your community, your organization, and them. So be mindful of that, and don't fall to the lure of, you know, we're playing our part, we've done our part, we've ticked the box.
Clive, I'm going to come to you about this question of tokenism, but just to warn all three of you, I'm then going to ask you for what your advice, your top 3 things you'd say to business leaders is, and then we're going to go to questions. So please, everybody, just keep your questions coming in, and we'll be able to go through them. And if you don't want to ask them yourself, please spell it out, and I'll ask for you. So Clive, pendulum swung too far the other way.
I don't think I even really know what that means, actually. It's just such total crap, isn't it? That I just can't understand it. And again, it's a good one. I mean, let's look at a lot of big events in history. You know, and obviously we got, you know, post-pandemic. Everyone goes, things will never be the same again. But if you fall for that, you're done, because things normally, it's amazing how quickly things do revert to being the same again. And the interesting thing that was triggered by the incredible reaction to George Floyd and the astonishing level of murders that happens in this country to people of color is that's been going on for a long time. You know, I mean, so why does it become more important in the light of one event? This has been going on for years. And it's about having the right conversations all the time. So you've got to continue that narrative, that says what we're having to, why haven't we got more black leaders in positions that reflect, their position within the demographic. And we haven't got it, no matter what you talk about, no matter what distraction tactics you use, that is an issue. You've heard far more articulately than I can say from Lexi and Sharon about what causes that. And I do think I will endlessly come back to this. We use very neutral, opaque language to discuss these things. And as long as you go, a bit of unconscious bias training for the organisation may well put this right. Well, again, it's absurd. It's absurd if you think that's going to solve the problem.
This is interesting because this is our way, isn't it, as British people, I think, as well, to not quite say things that might be a bit uncomfortable and to tread around the issue. How do we crack through this? Because this is at every level of an organisation. We can't just.
Well, I mean, even for me, Claire, when you're in, I mean, certainly, the immediate reaction to the Floyd tragedy was I was suddenly being invited to, 10 meetings a day, 30 a week, because it was imperative that we discuss that now, which again, you've heard what I think. I think, yes, this is awful, but he's suddenly saying this is really important now, but it wasn't yesterday and it isn't tomorrow. And it isn't next year. That's what you've got to get people focused on. And I mean, even me, and I'm highly experienced in a lot of these sorts of forums. But when you say the sort of things that I will say about these things, people get very uncomfortable and don't like it because they want to neutralise the language. They want to we don't want it to sound too nasty a problem, and we really want to do something about it. But we're kind of doing things here that will kind of make it okay. It doesn't, does it?
I was in a meeting the other day where somebody said, because I tried to make the point, racism's a white problem, like homophobia is a straight problem, like sexism's a male problem. We need to tackle what we can tackle from the correct people, not focus on, for example, women trying to tackle misogyny. And I got very strongly sort of told that actually, we can't exclude white men from this. It's not, and I wasn't trying to exclude, I was actually trying to empower, but put the responsibility for changing things where it lies actually. And straight away I was put back in my box. And so I feel like that's the same kind of experience. Lexi, can we come back to you? Can you round up what we've just been talking about this pendulum swinging the wrong way, too far the other way? And could you also tell us like your top 3 tips for businesses right now?
Yes, I would say to kind of round up what everyone said about this is there's still very much a experience of one in, one out. We have one, we don't need another, but when that person leaves, let's replace that person with someone who looks just like them. We cannot continue to do that. The second thing around this is there has to be an understanding in this world with the population that we have, that when you have a executive search process and the people who make it to the final panel are only white males, that does not say you are the best. You were chosen because you are the best. You were chosen, you're the best of the white males that were at that final panel, okay? We cannot believe as a society, there's a saying, genius is equal, access is not. So we need to improve access because there's talent everywhere. Sharon and I and all the other great senior people of color, we are not Black unicorns. There are more of us. You need to search for them. And on my solutions, I would pick up what you said. If the minorities, all minorities could have solved this issue, it would have been done a long time ago. So we need to open up about this conversation. It's hard to talk about, but we have to go further. The other thing is something that Sharon said, and I always say, data matters. Not going to be able to write a DE&I strategy or make a shift if you don't know what you already have. You need to understand data matters. And if you say you're going to do something, you track it and you publicize it. And I use the quick story of Nike and Adidas, or Adidas. They both went on a great DE&I strategy. Nike presented to its employees and customers what they were going to do in this space. And they give an update. Even if they don't hit their targets, they give an update and they say, this is what we're going to do to hit our target. Adidas did not do that. When you look at sales, Nike's has increased. People just want you to be transparent and tell the truth. And then thirdly, I would say, it starts with all of us from within. You have to do the work. You have to stay in the gym. And there's a story about Michael Jordan that even after games, he would stay in the gym and shoot. You've got to stay in the gym and do the work. It's not easy, but it will not change unless you do it.
Brilliant. Sharon, your 3, please.
So I've decided that I'm going to develop for myself an alter ego and call it Clive. Because of the fierce stridency that and how unapologetic Clive is on this agenda. I've seen him in various spaces and I really appreciate it. I would say to business leaders the following. First of all, that we are in a war for talent. And if you just switch the news on, and you will hear across the various news outlets how much of a challenge there is to securing good talent. There is a war on talent. And talent now is so much more empowered. It has a greater sense of agency and choice about where it wants to be, where it wants to work, where it will feel it will belong. And in order for us to win the war on talent, people have to feel as though that is a place that they want to work. And what we know increasingly from the research is that an increasing number of those who are on the job market are looking for places that are intentional about the agenda around diversity and inclusion. It's a deal breaker, and increasingly so. So if you are not demonstrably being clear about your position on that and your steps toward it, you will be left behind. The second point is that the employers need to recognize just how globalized and diverse the communities that we are sitting in are becoming. We are so much more interconnected than we ever were. The communities that we are in the UK will continue to be diverse. And so if you want to reach those communities with your services and with your products, they will be looking to see whether or not they are in those places where decisions are being made about them. Are you designing services? Are you designing products in the absence of people who will be consuming them the most, actually? And the more that that's the case, the less likely you will be able to have viability in the marketplace. So think sustainability, think viability. I'd also finally like to implore directly those who are making decisions, individuals. And I would say, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want as a leader, your legacy to be? Do you want your legacy, and it doesn't matter because actually the most effective leaders are the ones who use legacy as a forward thinking and a forward planning tool. At the end of your tenure, whatever that might be, do you want to be known as the leader who made a difference on this issue, or one who completely denied any responsibility, held their hands up and kept their head down? What do you want your legacy to be? Because either way, either by design or by default, you are shaping one.
Clive.
Thank you, Claire. Actually, can I just refer back before I give you my three examples? Lexi made a point about a shortlist, a white-only shortlist, to summarise the point. What's as equally invidious as that is also stalking horses and tokenism on shortlists as well. Well, they'll take that person, they'll take you right through and say, you're exactly the person we want, we want to change, and we're going to bring change about that. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, they'll absolutely duck it. And again, that's something that people go, yes, you know, we must make sure the shortlists are reflective. It's also then the decision, you know, our earlier conversation about how decisions are made and where power actually resides. I think that's really important stuff. And the three key messages, my first one is very much about the theme of the conversation today. You know, how does it feel like to be the one? And I don't know that, broadly speaking, for most of my life, do I? I mean, I go back funny when I started at the bar, Sharon. I remember going there as a kid. You know, and my biggest problem was I was just working class at the time. You know, I felt slightly uncomfortable. But you know, and how on earth does it feel for others? Okay, let me start then with the first one. The change. Look, change in relation to our key theme today can only be driven by organizations adapting and altering their own cultures and their own behaviors. And it can't, you know, we've got to switch from this emphasis of you have to fit with us. Because if that doesn't switch, you've got a big problem. Now, I'm not saying there doesn't have to be a degree of reciprocity in that relationship, in that transaction. You know, the individual also has to say, hey, it's got to be a degree of give and take here. But I'm afraid most of the give does have to come from the organization and its culture and how people behave. What's it feel like to be part of the, you know, the organization round here? Well, the question, well, what does it feel like to be them within the organisation round here? So I think that's a big squeak. It doesn't get talked about enough within organisations. Lots of tokenistic talks about, but not real. You know, they don't really think about how that's done. And closely aligned to that, my second one would be that organisations have got to increasingly tailor their employment practices, how they do things, to the needs of individuals and recognise individual circumstances. And that would hugely help with this notion of diversity within the fabric of organisations as well. Now, I mean, we've seen one of the big consequences of the pandemic is in relation to the way that people will work in future. But again, it's interesting how binary people's attitudes are. They think flexible and hybrid working means you work at home one day and in the office the next day. It's really old-fashioned, and that whole plurality and flexibility of thought's got to be much better. So we've got to broaden that degree of thinking to include how we better use diversity, both in our appointments and our promotions within our organisation. And that's a key, absolute determinant of improving profitability, and profitability in the widest sense in terms of delivering social value within our organisation as well. But, you know, people often say it like it's a big surprise. Do you know if you've got a more diverse organisation, you might be more efficient? Well, it's not a surprise, is it? It's not even remotely a surprise. So you just got to build on that narrative. Now, my last point is an interesting one, because I noted today that the 7th Global Equality and Diversity Conference Awards is taking place at this very moment. I'm sure it'll be terrific. But let me just quote, forgive me, I'll just read from this. Apparently it will explore the current controversies that are testing corporate responses to diversity, inclusion, and equality challenges. It will discover how corporate leadership, personnel management, government, legal, and comms teams, can adapt, that's an interesting word, their responses for better and proportionate outcomes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know I'm a bit bored on this, but as long as we use and hide behind opaque nonsense language like that, you'll never get to the critical issues that drive this change. And it reminded me, Sharon and I were having a conversation a couple of weeks ago around, it was the Good Employment Charter, wasn't it? And it was an issue around reporting, the importance of reporting, how you do it. And again, you've heard it really is important that we don't demonize people for reporting things that aren't good. But then I would say, well, look, actually, in companies, smaller companies, employees, I don't know, it was a really random number, less than 50 people. Actually, reporting is irrelevant. Let's just ask them the direct question. Do you employ anyone in the organisation doing the same job? The result of their ethnicity, gender, or disability is paid a different rate for the job. That's what we've got to do. We've got to do stuff like that and not be frightened of it, because you can't obfuscate around that. You either do it or you bloody don't do it. And I'm not going to shout at you if you don't, but I'm going to suggest that you probably should do.
Excellent. Right, we're going to move on to questions. The first one that's come in was from Lucy. Now, her question is, what can we do to encourage positive and lasting change? I feel like we've just answered that from an organisational perspective in these sort of 3 ideas. So I'm going to come to Sharon and then Lexi, say, at a personal level, what can we do, please?
So at a personal level, I believe that what can sometimes happen is we can be overwhelmed with the size of the task and the ask. And it can feel so overwhelming on an individual level that we feel as though we've got no agency. It's a huge elephant. How do we begin to even consume it? But I would encourage every single person around this room to recognize that everyone has agency. Everyone has power, everyone has a voice, and everyone can make a difference. And that looks like different things. It will manifest in different ways. There is no one size fits all in relation to what you can do and how you can do it, but recognizing that every single person today can do something on this issue and be a change agent.
Lexi?
Yes, I would say that from a personal level, when the George Floyd murder happened, I was getting so many calls from people who were saying, I just want you to glance over this program. It was for something else, but I'm going to use it for this. And they were making money, et cetera, on these different programs. And it was tiring. It was exhausting because I was having to use my personal example, but I had to do it. I didn't want people to go out and be an agency and say they're going to do certain things. So for me, I just say, I can't get tired of answering the question. I do want you to do your homework before you come to me, but I have to still be there and answer questions, and I will.
I love that. I love that. So the next point that's been made was by Elizabeth King. You made a point during Lexi's story about this horrible experience she was having in this job interview. Would you mind coming on to the mic, because you've put a point on here that says at least they've been honest. What do you mean by it?
No, first of all, when I see women of color at top level, executive director level, I feel sorry for them, because they are holding so many responsibilities to be just the black one there. And then they have to act, they have to be role models, they have to represent the whole community. So I feel the responsibility for them, but it's really thumbs up. It's no easy way to get there. And, it was also mentioned, there is a lower level and then there's the top level, like a dot. Sometimes I say it's like the rare species, like, you go to a big office and there is one there. So, but then the gap is huge, and not because there are no people, I have friends, and me and my friends, we just laugh, we have management level, we're qualified, but we know we don't go to that application. We don't apply for it because we know we don't get it. It's not because we cannot do the job. It's because, we'll be, oh, you're very good, but there was always the other person who's good at it. Or because you're, like they don't say your English is not good, or because you don't, if you get that responsibility, you deal with it. If you have direct feedback saying, we don't want you to be a token, or, yeah, you've got too much first-hand experience of the, if they say that, you deal with it. But if they say you're very good at it, but, they pick one of your weaknesses and say, maybe your English writing is not up to the level. What can I do with that? You cannot argue with that, but that, these people have to be aware of it, because, when I work in international development environment, I represent, like if there is a job about Sub-Saharan Africa, I have first-hand, living experience and also the qualification, but I have too much experience, so I cannot be in the management level for that. Same with my friends, I'm representing the people I know. So because we have too much experience, we're not needed. That's why we tell each other. Or we have to find somebody else who's from the UK, who lived for 2-3 months in sub-Saharan Africa. So they have the experience, but they can tell they've been there. But so we have to match with them, like we have to work with them, because we need their faces, we need the front face of that. And you see the gap between to get there, it's good, but it's not the easy way to get there. But there is a huge gap in between. So if any organization want to say they genuinely want, people of color to come forward and get the position, then they need to be open. I'm not saying, like you have to do affirmative action of less qualification. We do have the qualification, but can you be able, okay, this person can do the work, but maybe, it's the English is second language, so we can work on that. Do they have that kind of attitude? That's why I said, at least they told you that we don't want you to be a token. So it's up to you to decide. At least they're upfront to that, if that makes sense.
That makes brilliant sense. Thank you so much. Just as I put that on you, I thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this with no warning to Elizabeth, and yet you've done that absolutely brilliantly. So thank you so much for speaking. So the next question is about Black History Month. It's from Beth Jones, and you raised this, Clive. We do all this stuff during Black History Month. Where's our voice gone the rest of the time? Or we did it around George Floyd, then we disappeared off the face of the earth again. How do we keep this momentum going month on month and it not sort of peak at times like this where we're, there's something going on like Black History Month that's actually a positive thing, or when actually something negative goes on, we see these peaks as well. What about the rest of the time?
I think I probably haven't got a lot to add to it. I think that, the focal points are useful. They draw attention, they broadcast, they get to a wider part of the demographic. That's good. It raises awareness about things that not everybody knows and gives you new insight. It also there is an equal and opposite reaction. It will recreate that that earlier question. Has the dial swung too far? Oh, we've got a whole week on Black history, so it can have negative connotations as well in parts of the population. But what you've got to do is it's in the framework of the meeting we're talking about, you can't let that be right. That was great. We're going to use Black History Week to illustrate these points within what we want to achieve within the organisation or organisations or whatever. But that's just 1 week, and you've just got to continue and have the conversations. You use those. People like me have got to give their time to networks that they would not normally get involved in, and I do try to whenever I possibly can. That is the danger, Claire, that we just lurch from one event to the other. As far as actually, part of what we're setting out to do collectively here is this. I do think that lacks the narrative actually on that, and that's down to perhaps it's about how you marry that notion of organisational reporting and the importance of not demonising organisations then that report and aren't doing well, because as long as you're on a journey, we'll try and help you. If they continually continue at that rate, obviously you've got to do something about it. Sorry, that's an imprecise answer to that, but I hope that's helpful.
No, it's very helpful. Lexi, we're going to come to the next question, if that's okay.
Okay, great,
because it's about adverts, job adverts, and you're the recruiter on here. So we're looking at unconscious bias. Do you find that there's unconscious bias language in adverts?
There can be, and what I always say is look at your job description, person spec, and your advert, and are you putting in barriers that's not needed? Are you saying must have a college degree? An example is a young woman said, I have a college degree, but it's from beauty school. This role had nothing to do with beauty school, but she was interviewed. College degree wasn't needed, but she was interviewed because she graduated from beauty school, and a lot of other people who had no degree, who may have had more experience, were not interviewed for that one thing.
What about adverts generally, Sharon? I'm not sure. I've just reread the question. I wasn't sure if it meant job adverts or just adverts generally. Are you finding that there's unconscious bias through the media?
Yeah, so there's something around, one, where are they placed? So where are they being advertised? And to what extent is the location that they are in situ accessible to communities that you want to reach? And if they aren't strategically placed, then your first barrier is going to be the right eyes not being set on them. That's your first issue. But there's been a whole load of research, certainly with a real focus on gender and how the challenges around the language being used in relation to it being very male and masculine and driven, that might cause women to exclude themselves because they feel, well, I don't have the characteristics that would fit that particular model. That's not my strength. And they will therefore rule themselves out, where what's really important is for organizations to think about what are the skills that we need, and let's write the profile to meet those skills. So I completely concur with the question. Most definitely, there's been significant research which points to the fact that there needs to be reframing, there needs to be adjustments, there needs to be reflection on how those adverts are being framed and the language that's being used, so that they invite people who would otherwise exclude themselves into the arena. But first and foremost, think also about where they are being placed and who you are inviting. One of the things I find quite striking again about the whole question of recruitment is just how much, notwithstanding whatever adverts you might do, how much relationship also plays a part, especially at a senior leadership level, to people coming to the table. And so often what I see as being really effective is you've got the job advert out there, but then it's the reaching in and going, actually, Sharon, have you thought about this? You might not think that you've got A, B, C, and D, but I've seen these strengths in you. And I think that actually there's the other piece that we could work on, but for sure, you've got these skills that will definitely add value. And so even beyond the job advert, it's what sits alongside that to bring people to the table who might not otherwise think themselves eligible.
And thank you, Aisha, for that question. The next one's from Lisa. She would appreciate hearing the view of the panel on setting diversity targets in organisations, specifically at senior and board level. Do they work? What are the problems associated with them? And are there better ways for organisations to be more inclusive? Clive, can we start with you?
By the way, just going back to the last question, I'd also make the point that you've also got to segment your recruitment market, and senior jobs are still mainly allocated on results of networks. People will tell you it isn't, but I'm afraid it is. And then remember, a lot of the middle ranking stuff now goes through algorithms and incredible filters. And if you've not been trained in how to get through those filters and use the right language, and the right language may well be the right language, it is the wrong language in the context of our conversation today. So these are quite complicated. And again, it's about having the right conversation about the right thing. And sorry, my brain's faded. I've completely forgotten the question I was supposed to be answering. What was it? Reporting.
Targets, for senior level.
It is important, and I'm absolutely not knocking it, because reporting will drive change. The more we understand about what's happening, the better. It's about accepting as well, though, that a lot of stuff that gets reported in that space where you're not subject to strict audit, or there is a degree of subjectivity in that return, will not always be accurate. So beware the data. It would be a health warning on that one. You've got to then, though, have a really big conversation about, don't demonize. This is about, we've all got to, we've got to put it, you heard a nice story, was it Nike, Lexi was talking about, or I just can't remember, no matter what you do, here's where we are this year. We'd like it to be better. It's not. We're on that journey, and we're still committed to it. That is not a great, that is not an easy mentality for most corporations to take on, because their natural view is to kind of not quite, is to give a twisted version of the truth. I think, though, that what we can do is that earlier example I gave you, where certainly as you go down the scale, smaller organisations, it's not about complex reporting that recognises complex hierarchies in complex organisation. It's just asking very direct questions about your employment practices. And is there any notion of discrimination around those that are currently going on? Now, what is challenging here is what we also talked about earlier. How do you report and measure changes in corporate culture to make those people progress, those minority people in an organisation progress and flourish? And that is very, very, very difficult. I've got the odd thought about it, but nothing that impresses me much, to be honest. Impresses me about my own thinking. Actually,
So we're coming to the end of this. I want to make sure I let you all go at past and we don't go over. Sarah Barrett's written something interesting. I think all leaders also have to speak up in the workplace and internally challenge the status quo and challenge the business to think and to act differently. That puts something onto all of us to take away. When we have these opportunities to make a difference, we need to make them. Lexi, I want to come to you for the closing words, because you missed out on the opening words due to technology. So this has been your idea, this idea of the one. What do you think? Have we covered everything? Is there anything else you want to say? What should we go away with?
I think we covered a lot. I also go back to targets. What gets measured gets done, just like any of your other goals and things in stretch. I'm sorry, I said I wanted to quickly do targets, and then I'll say what gets measured gets done. And I think it's targets, not quotas. And just like any of your other business strategies, make someone responsible and accountable for it. So that's what I would say about targets. I think this has been a great conversation. I think it's done what I really wanted, which was to raise awareness and start the conversation. But it can't stop here. We have to continue, because for me, I will have failed if I'm here 5 years from now having this conversation, and it can't be prompted by certain things. Unfortunately, there has already been, and there will be other George Floyd incidents. So we can't make it predicated on that. This just has to be part of the environment. This just has to be part of every day.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Listen, thank you all so much for coming to this today. Thank you for all the nice things you're saying in the comments as well. Thanks for contributing and asking questions. And then a massive thanks to our speakers, Clive Mehmet, Sharon Amesu and Lexi Sims. I think this has been absolutely brilliant. I've put my email address in here in case anyone wants to stay in touch with me at the Good Board. And we'll be releasing this video. We'll crop all the bits off at the beginning where we were messing about, and then we'll send a link out to everybody, and please do share it with your friends. And as I say, this is the start of a series of events for the Good Board. So we'll let you know when the next one is, and hopefully it'll appeal to you, and we'll see you at that one as well. Thank you all so much, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed it. Take care.
Everyone, bye-bye.
Bye.
See you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Lex. Thanks, everyone. Have